this is Pinchas. Welcome back to one of my driving videos. It's another day. I'm driving to work as usual. A little bit of stop and go traffic, and I'm bored. I like to think in my car. I like to meditate, and I'm glad that I have you along for the ride so I can share some of my thoughts with you. This week I've been reading Psalm 145 and kind of been thinking through some of the verses in there. And so every time I read the Psalms, I like to take my time and I like to read them in Hebrew. And so people ask me, why do you want to read them in Hebrew? Well, because a lot of times when I do, I see something different than what I can see in English. And so in these videos, what I do is I read them with you, and I like to share a few insights that really come out from reading the Psalm just the way it was written in this beautiful ancient Hebrew poetic language. So Psalm 145 is one of those really inspirational psalms, because when you read it, you realize the author just launches straight into praise. And so I wanted to focus on verses 3, 4, and 5. So just coming to a stoplight here, so I wanted to take a moment and read these verses for you. Verse 3 says, Gadol Adonai umchulel meod, veligdulato ein cheker. Great is the Lord, and highly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, ugvoratecha yagidu. One generation shall praise your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. Hadar kevod chodecha, v'divrei nifleotecha asicha. On the glorious splendor of your majesty, and on the wonderful works I will meditate. So beautiful words of praise, and even in words like these, we can find some pretty interesting insights when we look at them in Hebrew. So poetry in Hebrew is very unusual. It's not built on rhyme or even a rhythm. It's built on the parallelism of thought, and there's a play of words that happens all the time. And so right here in this first example, the word gadol is being played with. So Gadol Adonai umchulel meod is the first phrase, and it says, great is the Lord, and highly or greatly to be praised. So meod means much or many, of course, and so gadol means great. Umechulal is halal is lechalel is to praise. So great is the Lord and highly to be praised. And then the second part of that same sentence says veligdulato ein cheker. So hear that word gadol again, veligdulato. Gdula, gadol, there's that same exact root. So his greatness, the author says, ein cheker. Now the word cheker just means research, like study, literally. And ein is a negative particle. It means not. So not searchable, not researchable, not studyable, essentially. So the author says, God is great, and his greatness, okay, gdulato, is unsearchable, impossible to quantify. So hopefully you see how Hebrew plays with the word gadol here. Now the next sentence, more parallels. So dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, from one generation to another, it says literally. Dor means generation. Yishabach ma'asecha. Shabach is another form of praise. So you have Hallel, then you have Shabach. Those are parallel words. The author is again playing with the word praise. Now he's using a synonym essentially. So Yishabach ma'asecha, they will praise your works, your deeds. Asa means to do, or to perform something, to make something. So ma'asecha is your works. But then the second part of the phrase says ugvuratecha yagidu, which means your might, your strength. Gibor, Gibora, Okay, so we have a lot of words in Hebrew that come from that same root. It means strong, mighty. So, ugvorotecha, your might, yagidu, they will tell. Yagidu is one of those words. Alihagid means to tell. We have Hebrew word Haggadah. Like we read the story on Passover, the story of Exodus, and we read from this little book that we call a Haggadah. So that's the same exact word. So Yagidu is I will tell, like a narrative tell. So first the psalmist says your greatness is unsearchable, but then it says from one generation to another, people will discuss your deeds. And then your greatness is something that they're going to talk about and retell and tell stories about. So yes, your greatness is unsearchable, but we're still going to talk about it. But then the voice switches all of a sudden in a psalm. The psalmist has been talking about people praising God in plural. So this from one generation to another generation, these people are talking about God's greatness and expressing his praise. But now it becomes personal. So verse 5 says, on the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wonderful works I will meditate. Now, what does that mean? Let's get into this in Hebrew just a little bit more. Glorious splendor of your majesty. Hebrew says, Hadar kivod chodecha. Hadar can mean anything like ornament or decoration of some sort. Kivod, of course, is glorious, and chodecha is splendor or majesty, something of an appearance that's really beautiful. Really aesthetically sort of say pleasing and something really amazing, something extraordinary. So obviously we're talking here about God's attributes and his beauty, his grandeur. And the second part of the phrase says, V'divrei nifleotecha asicha. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but something interesting happens in this verse. The verb is all the way at the end, and this doesn't always happen in Hebrew. Usually in Hebrew, it's the verb, subject, object. That's really how the sentences flow. But here, the writer flips it completely. He flips the grammar. He puts the verb at the very, very end. So, asicha means meditate. I will meditate. Come to think about it, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm meditating. I'm driving and thinking about these words, and I'm meditating. And that's exactly what he says. V'divrei nifleotecha asicha. Divrei means words a lot of times, but it's one of those terms in ancient Hebrew that is very, very broad. It can actually mean a matter or thing, not just like a word in the sense of a word I'm spelling out or something like that. But it's such a broad term. It just can stand for anything. So, divrei nifleotecha, this is where I need a little help. Nifleotecha, niflaot means some sort of a wondrous deed, some sort of a miracle, some sort of signs, sort of manifestations that are really extraordinary and supernatural. So niflaot are usually translated as signs or miracles of some sort. And so when the writer says divrei nifleotecha, I have to say, is he talking about the words that are of miracles or signs? No, he's talking about deeds here. And this is where I come to the point on this verse 5. As I meditate, as I drive this morning to work, I'm thinking to myself, I ask myself, how often am I engaged in doing exactly what I'm doing? I am thinking, I'm meditating about God's words. I'm thinking about his majesty, perhaps, or his greatness, just what the psalmist is saying. But a lot of times I'm focusing on the words, divrei, davar, okay, words. I'm looking at these sentences and I'm reading these sacred texts and I'm trying to understand what they mean. But what the psalmist is saying here is a little bit different. Maybe I should focus a little bit more on God's deeds. And that's what he's highlighting. he speaks about the works of God's hands, not just his words. He's speaking about signs and wonders that God performs in our lives, not just things he said or taught us. And this is where I catch myself, and I think I'm not alone in this boat, is a lot of times I focus on what God said and not on what God did. But today, as I'm reading these words, and I come to this realization that perhaps I should refocus. Today I'm going to focus on what God did, and I'm going to recount the things that happened to me, things that happened to my family, things that are happening in my life right now, and perhaps think even a little bit further into the past on what God has been doing for me in my life. And that is going to be an expression of praise, and perhaps I'll even tell those things to other people. So that's my meditation this morning as I'm driving and thinking about Psalm 145 verses 3, 4, and 5. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like these videos, do me a favor. Please hit subscribe, hit like, share it with a friend on occasion, and drop me a note if you'd like that. I would love to hear what you have to say about us driving and thinking out loud.